Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. One cold day, snow was falling. A queen sat by the window, sewing. The window was black, like ebony. She pricked her finger. 3 drops of blood fell. The red blood on the white snow looked beautiful. The queen said, "I want a baby with skin like snow, lips like blood, and hair like ebony." Soon she had a baby girl. Her skin was white like snow. Her cheeks were red like blood. Her hair was black like ebony. The queen named her Snow White. Soon after the baby was born, the queen died. 1 year later, the king married again. The new queen was very beautiful, but she was also very proud. She wanted to be the most beautiful. The queen had a magic mirror. It hung on the wall. She often stood in front of it. She looked at herself and asked, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" The mirror always said, "You are the most beautiful, O Queen." The queen was happy. She knew the mirror always told the truth. Snow White grew into a beautiful girl. When she was 7, she had red cheeks, dark hair, and white skin. She was more beautiful than the queen. One day, the queen stood in front of her mirror. She asked, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the most beautiful of all?" The mirror said, "You are the most beautiful lady, O Queen, but I must tell the truth. The child Snow White is more beautiful than you." The queen was shocked and angry. She looked at Snow White. She saw that it was true. Snow White was more and more beautiful. Every day, the queen felt more jealous and angry. The queen became more jealous every day. She could not stand Snow White's beauty. Hatred filled her heart. She could not find peace, day or night. Finally, the queen called a huntsman. She said, "Take the child into the forest and kill her. I cannot see her any more." The huntsman had to obey. He took Snow White by the hand and led her into the forest. He stopped and pulled out his knife. He was going to kill her. Snow White cried, "Please don't kill me," she begged. "If you let me go, I will go deep into the forest and never come back." The huntsman looked at her crying face. He felt sorry for her. He put away his knife and said, "Go, my poor child, run away." As Snow White ran into the forest, the huntsman thought, "The wild animals will find her soon." Snow White ran into the forest, scared and alone. She did not know where to go. She was afraid of wild animals. She kept running, stepping on sharp stones and thorny bushes. She heard loud roars, but the animals did not hurt her. By evening, her feet hurt, her clothes were torn, and legs were scratched. She felt very tired. Finally, she saw a small cottage by a mountain. She knocked on the door, but no one answered. She opened the door and went inside to rest. The cottage was small, clean and neat. There was a white cloth on the table. On the table, there were 7 plates, 7 little knives, forks, spoons, and glasses. Everything was in order. Against the wall, there were 7 little beds. Each bed was neatly made with a white bedspread. Snow White was very hungry and thirsty. She didn't want to eat all the food, so she ate a little from each plate and drank from each glass. Then Snow White felt very tired. She wanted to sleep. She lay down on the first bed, but it was not comfy. She tried the other beds. One was too long, one was too short, one was too hard, and one was too soft. Finally, she found the last bed. It was just right. Snow White fell fast asleep. The cottage belonged to 7 dwarfs. Every day they went to the mountains to dig for gold. When it got dark, they came back home. When they went inside, each dwarf lit a candle. With the light from the 7 candles, they saw that someone had been there. The first dwarf said, "Who sat in my chair?" The second one asked, "Who ate from my plate?" The third one asked, "Who used my knife?" The fourth one asked, "Who ate my bread?" The fifth one asked, "Who ate my vegetables?" The sixth one asked, "Who used my fork?" The seventh one asked, "Who drank from my glass?" The dwarfs saw that their beds were not as neat as before. The first dwarf looked at his bed and said, "Who has been lying in my bed?" Then each dwarf looked at their own bed and asked, "Who has been lying in my bed?" When the 7th dwarf came to his bed, he saw Snow White asleep. "Look who's in my bed," he said. The other dwarfs ran to see. They held up their candles and looked at Snow White. "She is so beautiful," they said. The dwarfs didn't want to wake her up because she was sleeping so peacefully. So they quietly left the room. Later, it was time for dinner. The 7th dwarf sat in each of the other dwarfs' beds. The night passed peacefully. In the morning, Snow White woke up and saw the 7 dwarfs. She was scared at first, but the dwarfs were kind to her and asked her name. "My name is Snow White." "How did you find our cottage?" they asked. Snow White told them about her stepmother. She said the stepmother sent a huntsman to kill her. She said the huntsman let her go, and she ran all day in the forest. Finally, she found their cottage. The dwarfs felt sorry for Snow White. The oldest dwarf said, "If you help us, keep our house clean, cook, wash, and mend our clothes, you can stay here with us. We will take care of you." "Oh, you are kind," Snow White said. "I will be happy to help." Before leaving for work, the dwarfs gave Snow White a warning. "We will be gone all day," they said. "You will be alone. If your stepmother finds out, she may hurt you. Do not let anyone in the house while we are away." Snow White promised to listen to them. She was very happy living with the dwarfs. Every morning, the dwarfs went to the mountains to dig for gold. Every evening, when they came back, Snow White had dinner ready for them, and the house was clean. Even though Snow White was alone all day, she never felt lonely. She had a lot to do. The queen thought Snow White was dead, so she was happy. She believed she was the most beautiful woman in the land. After some time, she asked her magic mirror the usual question. She stood in front of the mirror and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the prettiest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You, O Queen, are very beautiful. But Snow White is still alive. She lives in a small house over the hill. You are beautiful, but Snow White is more beautiful." The queen became very angry. She knew the mirror never lied. She realized the huntsman must have tricked her. The queen was very jealous. She could not stand anyone being more beautiful than her. She decided to find Snow White and kill her. But Snow White must not recognize her. The queen made a plan. She would dress as an old woman. The old woman sold things from a basket. The queen put on old clothes and painted her face. No one would know she was the queen. She went through the forest. She reached the dwarf's house. She knocked on the door and called out, "Laces and ribbons for sale. Pretty laces and ribbons." Snow White looked out the window. She thought, "What harm can this old woman do to me?" Snow White opened the door. The old woman brought her basket inside. Snow White picked some pretty pink laces for her dress. The old woman offered to help lace up Snow White's corset. Snow White trusted her and agreed. The queen laced Snow White very tightly. Snow White could not breathe and fell to the floor. She looked like she was dead. When the dwarfs came home, they were shocked. They saw Snow White on the floor, not moving. They lifted her up gently. They saw how tight the laces were. They cut the laces, and soon Snow White started to breathe again. Her color came back to her face. The dwarfs knew the old woman was Snow White's evil stepmother. The dwarfs warned Snow White again, "Be careful and don't let anyone come in." The queen rushed back through the forest feeling happy. She thought Snow White was dead, so she must be the most beautiful now. When she got home, she took off her disguise and stood in front of the mirror. She asked, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the prettiest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, O Queen, are very beautiful. But I must tell you the truth. Snow White is not dead. She is still alive, living in a house over the hill. And though you are beautiful, Snow White is more beautiful." The queen made a plan to kill Snow White again. First, she made a poisoned comb. Then, she changed into an old woman and filled her basket with things to sell. She walked through the forest and came to the dwarf's house. She knocked on the door and called, "I have cheap things to sell, pretty things to buy." Snow White looked out the window and said, "I can't let you in. I promised the dwarfs not to open the door to anyone." "Never mind, you can just look," said the old woman, holding up the pretty comb. Snow White thought the comb was beautiful and opened the door. The old woman said, "Let me comb your hair." Snow White said yes and sat on a stool. The queen then put the comb into Snow White's head. The poison went into Snow White's body. Snow White fell to the floor and looked dead. It was almost evening when the 7 dwarfs came home. They saw Snow White on the floor again. They thought her stepmother was behind it. They found the poisoned comb and took it out. Snow White woke up and told them what happened. The dwarfs spoke to her seriously. They warned her about her evil stepmother. They asked her not to let anyone in while they were away. The queen was rushing through the forest. She said, "I've killed her this time." When she got home, she took off her disguise and stood in front of the mirror. She asked, "Mirror, mirror, who is the prettiest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You, Queen, are very beautiful, but Snow White is still alive. She is living in a small house over the hill. Snow White's beauty is greater than yours." The queen got very angry. She stamped her feet and hit the mirror. She said, "Snow White will die even if it costs me my life." The queen knew it would be hard to trick Snow White again. So she made a new plan. She took a nice apple with a green side and a red side. The apple looked so good that anyone would want to eat it. The queen put poison in the red side and kept the green side safe. This time, She filled her basket with apples and dressed as a farmer's wife. She went to the dwarf's house and knocked on the door. "I can't open the door to anyone," Snow White said. "It's okay," the farmer's wife said. "I just want to give you these apples." "Take one," she said, holding out the poisoned apple. "I can't take it," Snow White said, shaking her head. The farmer's wife laughed. "Are you scared it's poisoned?" she said. "Look, I will cut it in half, and we will both eat it." She cut the apple and ate the green half. She gave Snow White the red half. The red half looked so good that Snow White couldn't stop herself. She saw the woman eat the green half and thought it was safe. Snow White took a bite of the red half. As soon as she bit it, Snow White fell down, dead. The queen laughed and said, "This time the dwarfs can't wake you up." Then the queen went back to her palace and asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the prettiest of them all?" The mirror said, "You, O queen, are the fairest of all." The queen was happy. When the dwarfs came home at night, they found Snow White on the floor. She was not breathing. They wanted to help her. They loosened her clothes, combed her hair, and washed her face, but they didn't know why she was dead. The dwarfs were very sad. They stood around her and cried, saying, "Our beautiful Snow White is dead." They stayed with her for 3 days and nights, crying. After 3 days, the dwarfs knew they had to bury Snow White, but they couldn't because she looked like she was still alive. So they made a glass coffin to see her. They wrote her name, Snow White, and a king's daughter, on the coffin in gold letters. The dwarves took the glass coffin to the top of a mountain. They took turns sitting by the coffin, day and night. Snow White looked like she was sleeping. Her skin was as white as snow. Her cheeks were as red as blood, and her hair was as black as ebony. Even the birds came and cried when they saw her so still. Snow White lay in the glass coffin for many years. She looked like she was just sleeping. One day, a prince found the coffin on the mountain. He looked at the beautiful girl inside and fell in love with her. "Please give me the coffin," he begged the dwarfs. "I will give you anything you want." But the dwarfs said, "We will not give Snow White, not even for all the gold in the world." The prince kept asking, "I can't live without her. If you give her to me, I will love her forever." Finally, the dwarfs felt sorry for the prince and agreed to give him the coffin. The prince's servants were carrying the coffin down the mountain. They tripped on a tree root. The coffin shook, and the piece of apple in Snow White's throat fell out. Snow White opened her eyes, lifted the coffin lid, and sat up. "Where am I?" she asked, surprised. The prince was very happy to see her alive. He told her everything and how he loved her. "Come with me to my father's palace, and we will get married," he said. Snow White said yes. She said goodbye to the dwarfs, who had been kind to her. The dwarfs were sad to see her go, but they were happy she was alive and would be happy with the prince. A big wedding was planned for Snow White and the prince. Snow White's stepmother was invited. On the wedding day, the queen, wearing her best clothes, asked the mirror, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who is the prettiest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You, O queen, are beautiful, but the young bride is more beautiful than you." The queen was very angry. She didn't want to go to the wedding, but she went because she was curious. When she saw Snow White at the wedding, she got so angry that she fell down. She was taken home and soon died. Snow White and the prince ruled the kingdom with kindness and joy. The dwarves visited them often, and they had many happy times together. The kingdom was peaceful and full of laughter. They all lived happily ever after.